Dragon's Dogma 2 was recently announced to have an expansion on the way, that being Dark Arisen. But together with this news drop, Capcom also announced that they have been working on title updates for Dragon's Dogma 2 before the expansion arrives. How's it going, by the way? Mr. Hulton here. Now, let's take a look at the most recent update. So the first thing you need to know about with this recent update is that they've added an eternal fairy stone to the game. Now, for a lot of you veterans who played Dark Arisen, or the original Dark Arisen that is, you might remember that there was an infinite use fairy stone that you can use to teleport essentially everywhere after the release of Dark Arisen back in the day, and yes, they have essentially just reintroduced the same thing here. And you receive the eternal fairy stone after you get to Sovereign, and you speak to Brant the first time, upon which you will be awarded with the Fairy Stone as well as 10,000 gold, which is a lot. I don't remember it being this much back in the original version of the game, but maybe it was. Now, if you've already gone past that point in the story, you will have the stone in your inventory already when you start up the game. Now, next in the patch notes are port crystals that they've added to various sections of the game, and now there is one in Melve at the start of the game, so if you want to go back there, you can do so with the Eternal Fairy Stone, if there's something you missed over there. So just remember to engage or examine it first before you leave Melve, otherwise you will have to run back there and activate it, because you need to do that whenever you want to use port crystals. The patch notes mentions that there's one in Checkpoint Rest Town and Volcanic Island Camp as well, but I haven't gotten there on this current playthrough, but I trust the patch notes here. Also, you apparently get a port crystal as a reward from the quest Monster Culling, which I didn't reach on this playthrough either, but you will also have that one in your inventory if you've already completed that quest. According to the patch notes, there are also additional ox cart stopovers, so, in case you want to fast travel using ox carts, you're going to be able to do that to more areas than before. Another interesting change that they've done is that they've decreased the amount of stamina used when you're dashing outside of combat. And yes, I've been playing around with it, and so you can definitely notice that, yeah, you don't get tired as quickly when you're out of combat. I did notice though, however, whenever you're sprinting and you're in combat, that you're still draining your stamina relatively quickly. So this is only whenever you're outside of combat and exploring, but it was a much needed change, I feel. And it makes exploration a little bit more enjoyable because you're not out of breath all the time. It also says here that selecting load from autosave after defeat will no longer result in loss gauge accumulation, which I didn't notice at first, but yes, when I look at my recordings here, I can definitely see that you don't have the loss gauge, like you don't lose more and more health every time you load up your game after you're dying to a boss or an enemy or something like that. So that's also pretty nice. That's a nice quality of life change, I feel. Apparently, they've also improved the stats for some equipment that is found when exploring dungeons. Now, I haven't taken a too deep look at that, but I have felt that some of the combat feels easier, possibly due to some of the gear. We'll get into that in a moment, but they've also added a free camera to the photo mode for all of you photo mode fans out there, and I played around with it a bit myself, and yes, it's definitely better because you can actually get the angle you want whenever you want to take some nice pictures. For example, my thumbnail, I actually used the photo mode for that, and yeah, much appreciated. We can finally take some really nice pictures. Now, in the options, you can actually now toggle the display of head armor, so if you want your Arisen or your pawn to still get the stat bonuses and protection from helmets and such, you can now hide that, so in case you just want to see your Arisen's pretty face, so to speak. Also, they've added options that I absolutely love here. They've added the options to enable and disable unhired pawns to approach you and offer their services. You know how they always run up to you and want you to hire them? I don't know how many pawns I've thrown off cliffs because I got so annoyed by them, so finally you can turn that off. That's really nice because sometimes you're just in a moment where you just do not want them to rush over to you, but they still do. Finally, they are not going to do that if you turn that off. Also, turning off high five is another setting they've added, which I also think is really good because as much as high-fiving your pawns is pretty cool in the beginning, after you've played like 100 hours, it starts getting pretty grating having to essentially getting forced to high-five the pawns whenever you've had a battle. So that's really, really cool. I like that they've added that as an option as well. Very nice quality of life updates here. Now, it says here, reward adjustments changed the content of some treasure chests and some enemy item drops. I have noticed, especially with this other line here, increase the rewards, mainly gold for some quests. The quests definitely do give more gold. So I've been able to essentially buy the house that you can get early in the city, Vermont, by barely even like exploring much. So they're definitely rewarding you much more through quest gold. And I've also noticed that most goblins and enemies drop more materials. If they don't drop materials, they drop gold. So yeah, they've obviously buffed the drop rate of a lot of stuff, or maybe not drop rate, but they've increased the loot table, so to speak. So yeah, you're finally going to be able to make some gold pretty quickly without having to grind the entire day. Not that you really did, have to before, but it's still nice not having to spend too much time grinding for gold, especially because you do need a lot of gold early on, especially if you want the house so you can, so you can rest. Also, some other cool UI adjustments here. Yes, they've added the possibility to just click on a port crystal on your map. Instead of having to go into your menu, you can just click on the port menu on the map, and it will automatically select the Eternal Fairy Stone if you have that in your inventory. So you can just, click whenever you want to. Fast travel teleports to another port crystal on the map. Very nice. And they've also added the Guardian specialization for the pawns. Now, don't get it twisted. This is not actually like a new, for example, new class or anything like that, but it is essentially a passive for your pawn where they can protect you against night raids whenever you have your camp up, or when you're resting at your camp, or whenever you're riding ox carts. So essentially your pawn will stand as a guardian whenever that happens. And so that is also pretty appreciated. I, for some reason, imagined that this was going to be something else, but I think this was also a feature in Dark Arisen back in the day. So yeah, this is very much appreciated. Makes it a little easier, fast traveling and things like that. Also, if you want to acquire this passive Guardian's Tome skill, you can find that at the Nameless Village. Where you talk to this guy to buy it. It also serves as a reward for the quests Claw Them Into Shape and Readvent of Calamity. And so, if you've already completed those quests, it will be in your inventory already, the tome that is. Apparently, they've also adjusted the behavior when moving, making it harder to fall from cliffs, and I think it is harder. I haven't really noticed much of a difference here because the game is still it's still pretty slippery when you're running up hills. But it seems like your character doesn't instantly, tip over when you're at the edge of a cliff or something, and it takes some time. You actually have to force them forward to actually fall off. So I think it is pretty noticeable there. So yes, it seems to be harder to actually fall off cliffs, which is appreciated. And it says here also that they increase the stamina recovered when pawns help you after becoming exhausted. And yes, I did notice that whenever you're exhausted, the pawns helping you out, getting your stamina back, it goes much quicker. So you rejuvenate or you recover much quicker. Now, there are some other adjustments here, like for shop adjustments where they've changed the price. For example, fairy stones now sell for 900 gold instead of 99, which means you can basically just sell off your fairy stones because you're just going to use the eternal fairy stone either way. They've also decreased the price for fairy stones overall in normal mode to just 5,000 gold instead of 10,000 gold. So, in case you haven't gotten the eternal fairy stone yet, it's a little cheaper now. And then we have a ton of bug fixes and small adjustments here and there that I don't really feel are necessary to mention in this video because they're really too small in my opinion to really matter. But you can look at the patch notes yourself if you want to. They have a pretty good list here that I think is pretty easy to read. Now, there are some other things we have to talk about here, and that is in preparation for Dark Arisen 2, they're going to be removing all of the microtransactions from the Steam store and the PlayStation store, whatever. They're just going to remove all of the microtransactions. So, that whole microtransaction debacle, we can just throw it in the trash. It's no longer a thing. They're not going to have microtransactions because you're going to be able to find everything in the game either way. So that's some pretty good news for people who, who felt like they still were annoyed by the fact that there are microtransactions for a game like this in the store. But you guys can argue about that in the comments. Either way, they are going to remove it. So, hey, Cool. Now, there is another title update coming before Dark Arisen 2, and that is in the end of August. And here it says that there will be 3.2 system improvements through game engine updates and adjustments, which is performance improvements, save system improvements, Dragon's Plague adjustments, action adjustments, pawn adjustments, UI improvements, enemy adjustments, and bug fixes. At any rate, it looks like Dragon's Dogma's future is getting brighter and brighter, actually. I'm very much looking forward Dark Arisen 2, being a huge fan of the original Dark Arisen. I just gotta say I'm looking forward to it. And apparently, according to Capcom themselves, the expansion is supposedly developed by having the original complaints for Dragon's Dogma 2 in mind. So essentially, it's like an answer to what people have been complaining about the base game. And essentially, you know, they're just fixing a lot of stuff and just making the game even better than it was before, because as we all know, the combat is incredible and the world feels good, and there's so many things that are so good in Dragon's Dogma 2, but there's a few things that they could have delivered much better on, and it seems like this is a new chapter for Dragon's Dogma. I'm really happy to see this. But yeah, I'll be covering the next update that comes in August, and obviously I will be covering the Dark Arisen 2 expansion when it finally drops, so if you're a fan of Dragon's Dogma, then remember to subscribe. Thank you for watching as always. Mr. Holton, signing off.